Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So, we're continuing the subject of the books that impacted us the most in on this journey. And it so happened that I mentioned last week that one of the books that impacted me the most was by Bernadette Roberts. And Sarah said that she happens to be one of those people that impacted her too. So, Sarah, we're going to talk about the amazing Bernadette today and yeah, why she impacted us so much. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. I love Bernadette, and she's one of those people that when I first encountered her, it felt like that was an awakening moment in itself, just like encountering her presence and her word and like I wasn't the same after. I remember being like something just happened
That's
when I
incredible. I'm actually going to pull the Wikipedia page to let those of you who have no idea who she is, to tell you a little bit about who she was because she's no longer with us. So, she was actually a nun, a Carmelite nun, and a contemplative in the Catholic tradition, and she entered monastery at a young age. I think she was 17. I'm just skipping through it because there's like a lot of details here. And then after 8.5 years of monastic life, she left the cloister and entered the University of Utah, where she was pre-medical student. I mean, she had degrees. She was also a teacher, and then basically she started having all sorts of experiences. She got married, by the way. She got married. She had children,
so she
and
left, I think she left being a nun to get married, is what
yes, 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 yes. Yes. Anyway, so Roberts extensively chronicled and described her life and spiritual journey. Her book, Contemplative Autobiography of the Early Years, presents an account of her early family life and spiritual experiences. And then her spiritual journey after entering the cloister is described in The Path to Know Self, Life at the Center. This book includes descriptions of her experience of the dark nights and of the state of union or unity consciousness, as spoken by various Christian mystics. After years of life in union with God, Roberts described an event she calls the experience of no self in the book, The Experience of No Self and Contemplative Journey. Um, the book, however, only covers a 2 year period after the events described. Roberts further elaborated on the context for this event. After the first publication of the experience, Roberts was invited to speak around the country to present her talk, A Passage Through Self, that uses a series of circles to illustrate the spiritual journey. Um, for the last 3 years, Roberts gave annual retreats entitled The Essence of Christian Mysticism, in which she presented the essence of Christian mysticism as Trinity, Christ, and faith. Her last work was The Real Christ, published in 2012. So that's Bernadette. And I don't actually remember because I read her book several times. I don't remember which book I read fast, but it was a long time ago before I've had all, before I went through all my shifts. And I found this book completely shocking. Because, and actually to this date, um, I don't think I've met anyone or read the book or heard of anybody's story being this intense, the journey of awakening being this intense. I mean, there were times when I read that, I remember that I felt like I was like someone was going through like a horror. It was like a horror. Like seriously, some of the moments that she experienced were just absolutely I mean, scary as shit, to be frank. I remember feeling really scared. And I'm like, this can't possibly be. anything to do with awakening. Like, how can awakening be this gruesome and like this shocking and this intense? And so I think I kind of blocked it out for that reason. It's like, I think there was part of me that basically refused to accept that this is this had anything to do with awakening. I saw her as some kind of an exception, maybe, or a very weird one. And that's it. And actually, um, then I realized that gradually that's actually what happens to many people, and that was one of the biggest kind of shocks that at the time when I couldn't understand what was happening to me, and I started to and I struggled to find people, anyone, spiritual teachers or whoever. All the conversations about awakening had to do with like bliss and transcendence and just this blissful, joyful ride filled with love and light and all sorts of lovely things. And here is, someone who was like describing something this gruesome. And then I was going through a really tough time and I couldn't make any sense out of it. Especially that this came after my first awakening. So I couldn't make any sense out of it because I didn't have any frame of reference. And I struggled for the longest time to actually find anyone who would explain what's going on. Not a great marketing for enlightenment to talk about the gruesome parts of the journey, I suppose. But it's nevertheless an important aspect of the journey. And she was my very shocking introduction to that. Do you wanna talk about that, Sarah?
Yeah. Well, first I kind of want to know, how did you find her books? Like if you weren't quite yet understanding, or it just came into your life unexpected.
Absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely don't remember
Hmm.
how that book. The only way I can think of that I may have come across this book, but I wouldn't bet on it, is because every once in a while, there were periods when I would sometimes watch Buddha at the gas pump.
Oh, that could be it. Yeah.
Okay, but like really, only when I saw like I couldn't listen to most of the spiritual teachers on Buddha the Gospel because I didn't understand what the hell they were talking about, you know?
Mhm.
So I can imagine that maybe the first time I came across her, that must have been via Buddha the Gaspam, because otherwise there's no other explanation. Because I didn't know anyone who was around me who would be exploring these things, you see, to like
Yeah.
recommend the book.
Yeah.
And now that you're asking, quite possibly it would have been, look, you asked me the question and here's the answer is arriving. Um, I think I must have watched because I think discovered Adyashanti, and he was the only teacher that I could stomach listening to. Um, and I really liked him. I liked him from the very start. And he remains one of my favorite teachers of all time. And I think he had a conversation with Anne Marie about no self on Buddha the gas pump. And I think that that's when they might have mentioned her. But is this true? Honestly, I wouldn't bet anything on it. But that's like the most um, possible scenario in which I happen to to stumble upon the book. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it was just too much. At the time when I read it, it was just too much. So I was shocked. I thought she was slightly crazy, to be honest with you. And it was really scary. So I think part of me just kind of blocked it out, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm impressed that you finished the whole book in that state, and like being shocked and horrified.
That's a pattern of mine. Once I start, I
Uh,
have to finish, even if I hate the book, because I always hope that somehow there will be something in that book that's going to be worth reading, you know?
It's got to be on the last page. Yeah,
Yeah,
keep
it's
going.
got to be on the last page. It's got to be there, you know?
And then everything worked out. Yeah. Um, that's so interesting. Yeah, because I think I just found Bernadette. I also don't quite recall exactly how,
Mm-hmm.
but I think maybe it was just like a recommended video on my YouTube or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
like popped up that she has this beautiful video of her doing this whole demonstration. It's so simple. She's just like sitting at a desk. It's this little like
Old school.
yeah, this little funny nun. Yeah, with her like 80s glasses and she's got this sort of I don't know what to call it, like a diagram, but it's she has these different pieces of the
Mm-hmm.
symbol that she works with to demonstrate what no self is. Um, and I remember I was actually going through like this really expanded state of
Mm-hmm.
unity consciousness where I was feeling like this oneness with everything, but in a very expanded way where it felt like this vast unity of presence with all around me. And I couldn't trace like the end of that vastness, right? It was just like, and so at that point, I was like, oh, this might be it. You know, there's always that stage where you're like, this might be it. Oh, this might be it. And I was really feeling like, oh, okay, this feels a much more of a stable vast space where I can imagine myself and know myself as this vast spaciousness in which all things occur, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but then I listened to Bernadette Roberts, and I was like, "Oh shit!" I feel like that's always like the cosmic joke is like you go into like this next stage of whatever feels like this beautiful
Mm-hmm.
next stage. And then for me, like very quickly, I get delivered a message like, that's not it. There's something else. And I watched her and I was like, damn, I could feel like in my core of my being, like this was true. It was so true. And I hadn't yet experienced it. I hadn't yet gone through it. And so, but I also felt like I knew when I watched it, like I knew it was gonna happen, or like I
Mm-hmm.
just felt like the inevitability of it. Like I felt like just by encountering it, I knew it was in my life for a reason. I don't know. It just had that feeling to it of like this is my future, or like something's gonna happen
Yeah.
like this. And but I like you, I was like, I have no idea what she's talking about in some ways, or just like felt very strange, but also very familiar
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the way she kind of talks through the different stages and things, I was like, okay, some of this I get. And then the later stages, like, holy. um, but even in her demonstration or articulation of it, even if it didn't make sense, it like registered and it felt so true. And it spoke to like the deepest place in me that, yeah. So,
I mean, I can't imagine a better person to be the messenger to tell us that we that we have still a way to go.
yeah, exactly.
It's like, and it's I can't actually believe you just said that because I read the book again years later, right? And at that point, I don't know, I must have been after the unity. That must have been after the emptiness, around that time. But again, I just have real trouble remembering things and especially timelines. So again, don't like I wouldn't bet on it. But I had the same thing. I was reading and all I knew is that there was a way to go. and that I don't understand what she's talking about. And that but it was just so clear that that was not my direct experience what she was talking about. That up to a point it was, and then it wasn't, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
But also exactly, and I think that this is, to me, this is such a great news for like everybody. That
Yeah.
thing that kind of knows the thing, that even if you don't understand what this person is talking about and it sounds like gibberish, very often may sound like gibberish or too complicated or whatever, but it's like you kind of don't understand, but you kind of know it, but there's something that feels the truth of it, that you can't, that you kind of already kind of know that on a different non-intellectual kind of level. And to me, I love those moments so much when anyone says this to me, when they read something or listen to something and they say this, because to me, every moment like this is just like another proof that we're really just mostly remembering rather than discovering anything new. Um, and that to me is just like I just is my favorite thing about that, you know. And I think we talked about it quite a bit in our previous conversation about Meister Eckhart as well, you know, just connecting to something that we might not even quite understand, and yet we're connecting to it somehow. So yeah, so this was the second time, and then I the third time, because I read this book multiple times, okay? And then I read two of her books after I've had all those shifts. And this was one of there was a kind of, I related to her and I really loved her for something that she said that I could relate to on a kind of personal quote unquote level. And I'm gonna actually read it so you guys understand what is it that I'm referring to. So one of the things she said, um, in some ways, the fact I always appeared so completely ordinary may have worked to my disadvantage when on occasion I went in search of help and found that no one could take me seriously. I wasn't a monk or a nun. I didn't practice a thing. I had no charisma and exuded no light. I was just a woman, geared to a teenage milieu. In short, I inspired no one. And then she shares a story of like talking to a monk to tell a Zen monk where she shared her experience. And she said, according to her experience of no self, according to one Zen monk, the reason I had to have a self was because I was not omniscient and omnipresent. Since this is the Christian notion of God, I thought he was joking and laughed heartily, only to discover that he was in earnest, because this is indeed the Buddha's notion of someone who no longer has a self. Evidently, I was in the wrong camp, but how did he know? I think he was only telling me I was just too unspectacular, too ordinary, and too common to have come upon no self. And and this kind of gets me every time because I can relate to this so much because I've not practiced anything. I've never followed any tradition. I haven't meditated. It's sort of just stuff just started happening. That does not mean that I didn't explore other things, but the whole point, I think there was a massive kind of surprise that things started happening to me, especially after the dark night, the emptiness, the unity, the end of separation, all the Kundalini or whatever, whether it wasn't Kundalini, I don't know, energetic bits, weird things happening to my body. And that was really surprising to me because I realized that I've had this belief that I don't even know who I inherited from, that this stuff doesn't happen to people like me. Like, I was just an ordinary person, you know what I mean? And I think I must have had this um, not I must have had, I had this belief that such things only happen to special kind of people. And I wouldn't even I wouldn't be able to even tell you probably at the time what that even means. Like what sort of special people. So I think what I meant at the time that like, you know, the typical, the sort of almost cliche now, the the people who go off to India and they have a certain type of lifestyle, and first and foremost they're dedicated to a spiritual practice, rigorous, and like not people in like regular life. They don't deal with like the mundane. They don't have like children, and they don't go to work from 5 to 9 for sure. And so, but not just the lifestyle. I thought that they were special kind of people that were just, they were made special somehow from the start. And so and they're rare, very rare, and it only happens to them. Like there's a whole enlightenment thing. Awakening, uh, slightly more accessible to mere mortals, but enlightenment or the liberation or moksha or whatever people call it, it's like forget about it. That's like for special kind of people. Either way, not ordinary people like myself. And so this was one, because I think I literally just this week got an email from someone who was telling me how they kept questioning their experiences when she described them to me. To me, she's literally describing liberation. And yet there was the questioning part at some point in her journey where, because she didn't feel worthy because she was so ordinary. And she had almost like a similar belief to that this doesn't happen to people like her, you know? Um, and so to me, Bernadette was like, I just connected with that. Like I could feel how she must have felt standing in front of the monk, this ordinary little person is talking, sharing her experience and kind of, being laughed at. Um, and then I went through a period, but I remember afterwards where I felt I was not qualified according to my criteria, um, to talk about it, to talk about my experiences, because like, who are you you think like I didn't receive any kind of certificate of attainment from the Ministry of Attainment. So therefore, I'm not, qualified to talk about it. So I don't know if this is something that resonated with you as well, but for me that was massive. I just love her ordinariness so much.
Yeah. I love the way that you shared that. And I know I just feel like definitely I connect to that, even though I did, I've been in different practices. I did end up in a lineage, but not in a traditional way. Like it was all kind of untraditionally. So even though I did meditation, I didn't do it the way other people did it. Even though I did do Buddhist practices, I didn't do the ones that were kind of mainstream or ones that are understandable by most
Mm-hmm.
folks. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I certainly, I felt like almost every step where I started doing something, I just, hearing you, I'm like, yeah, I never thought I would be here. I never thought I'd be doing any of this shit or like talking about this. Like, this was not the plan.
Seriously.
Like, this was not the plan. And I feel like that's how it wasn't your ego trying to create the situation. It was like, this just kind of happened. This stuff just kept unfolding and you just kept following it, and in that
Mm-hmm.
most genuine part of the
Yep.
self of who you are, that's like just taking that next step. And so it's very ordinary to who like you as an individual are. And I feel like for me, there's so much doubt. I think we are speaking to is like so much doubt along the way of like, am I really doing this? Or is this really happening? Or is like because it's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
like I
Mm-hmm.
haven't done enough for that to happen, or like I haven't meditated long enough, or and going to teachers who would also like not see in me the realization or that next stage, because they weren't able to reflect that. They weren't able to recognize it because it wasn't fitting their model of how these things work. So definitely. And I think I find now I'm like, okay, it's almost like I remember Adi Ashanti talked about he had a like a very clear linear path. He had a Zen teacher who advised him every step of the way. And literally, I think he said at one point, like, his teacher advised him of all the things not to do and he did them all, like that he like went against like all of the advice, and because of that he knows all these pitfalls. And I feel like the same thing for like self-doubt is like, because I went through so much self-doubt, like I know all the different stages of self-doubt and know like all the different ways I questioned my own awakening and my own experiences, and through that like had to really find like the truth, like really had to dig for like what is this. No one like handed me, oh, like you've reached stage 2, like like oh, congratulations, like you know,
Balloons. Just
yeah, now here's the next linear step to stage 3. Yeah,
linear with the
yeah.
emphasis on linear.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people have a linear path. I'm
Oh.
guessing not a lot of us, but I think there's something really amazing that comes out of that because you have such like I don't know, an internal strength that builds through that of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like I'm following my truth, whatever that
Yeah.
means. And yeah, and at a certain point, I remember when I did come into like, and I saw Bernadette's video, I was starting to feel there was this next thing that
Mm-hmm.
felt strange, but like there,
Mm-hmm.
that it felt audacious to feel like I could do that or that could happen, or because it felt like both, like I knew it, like you said, there's an intuition of knowing
Yes. Yes.
it
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
remembering it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part of you that's a part of me that was saying, like, that feels like really audacious. That was the word I used, like, really like strange to say, like, I'm gonna, or like, that's gonna happen, or
Yeah.
whatever it takes. Like, and but that's kind of like, allowing that part, that genuine longing for that to just express and be like,
Yeah.
I don't care if I'm you know, in the right path. I'm in my path, and this is what I feel I need to do. And I don't know why. And I don't even know how to do it. But it's just like what I'm up to, and this is the next step I'm taking. Yeah. And um I also there's another part of Bernadette that I really appreciated, was that she talked about like the stage after initial
Mm-hmm.
awakening, like
Mm-hmm.
unity.
Mm-hmm.
She talked about the importance to go back into the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She used that term, the marketplace, to test your
Mm-hmm.
awake, to
Mm-hmm.
see if that unity really applied to the world.
Yeah.
Does it apply to everyone? Does it apply to all situations, people, places,
Or
things?
just the nice ones and smooth
Yeah.
ones. And yeah.
Yeah. And that's what
Yeah.
I think is so beautiful about her, is that she left the nunnery to have a family and to have a normal life. And
Four
so she could
children, I think.
Yeah, so she could really speak to that and be like, at some point, you kind of have to leave the cloister and test your awakening and
Yeah.
see, does it apply? Does unity really apply to everyone? How about when you're triggered?
Yeah.
How about when you're in a conflict? Like,
Yep.
how is it like, and that
Mm-hmm.
really resonated for me was like, because I had such an urge to go back into community to test
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
see if it really worked
Yeah.
and see if it was truly universal, which is what I was longing for, like the universality of the realization. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I love what when you talked about like seeing the other teachers and like, they would sort of, I don't know whether you felt dismissed or how you felt exactly in those moments, but like just like you said something along the lines like because it didn't fit with their model or with their belief or whatever, it was like they wouldn't see what you saw. And I think that this is where, and I think we talked about it last week as well. Like I actually absolutely love I can't believe that I actually loved reading Daniel Ingram's book, like Hardcore Dharma or Buddhist something. Sorry, Daniel, if you're listening, I forgot the title completely, so I completely messed it up now. Um, but this is another example of where now I read it with a lot of curiosity and I see the value of having a reference point, quite honestly. Like, I really see the value of Buddhist teachings, all sorts of teachings that are out there. And I can see how they can be incredibly helpful. And I can also see how they can do literally the opposite, especially when they are held on to as like, this is the only way, you know? And I think that like Daniel's book, had I read it, I don't know, a few years ago, I would lose my will to live, by the end of this. Like the way the stages that are described, all the inside stages, all the nuance. Now I read it with like curiosity. It's like what, like, oh, this is what it's called, and like, trying to connect the dots. But had I read it years earlier, I'd be so completely put off from even exploring this because it just sounded inaccessible, way too complicated, way too much doing stuff instead of just being. Like so much focus on like it just felt like hard work and nothing in my body was buying it because I already had what I refer to as my initial awakening, and I already knew that that wasn't true, that it was not, I mean, I was not an expert on awakening or anything like that by any standards, but that I knew that it was accessible to everyone and that it was not complicated and you didn't have to work for it or at it. And so, and again, I'm not saying for some people it is the path. And that's precisely how awakening plays out for them through disciplined practice, through meditating and all sorts of ways. So I'm absolutely not being dismissive of that. I'm just saying that I know for the fact that there are many, many people like myself who never consider themselves spiritual, who would, for example, come across a book like this and be like, I'm out. Like, this is not for me. I'm not even going to explore this. This is too complicated. I have a life. I have a family. I have to like go to work. Who the hell can like track this thing and, whatever. So my point is, I love the frame of reference. I think there's such place, and I really value the knowledge that's out there in various schools of thought and traditions. But I can so see how it can also be like a massive, obstacle. And Bernadette's story kind of also speaks to that, where she couldn't find the answers to what she was experiencing. Do you wanna add anything else to it, Sarah?
Yeah.
That bit?
Yeah. No, I really appreciate this, like the like just not things not being necessarily spiritual. Like not like the all the Buddhist terminology, all the, you know, you can, like you said, this is so simple. This is like this even beyond simple at a certain point that like it feels like, yeah, I had the same issue with a lot of the doctrine things I would come across in Buddhism or other traditions.
Mm-hmm.
just be like, it's too complicated, all this stuff. And yet for some people, that's exactly what they need. And
Yes.
so like appreciating that I encountered so many teachers, and this part of my path was encountering teachers that were very meticulous in all the details.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
was their path. And
Yes.
encountering them made me doubt myself even more because I was like, but I'm like much more, like you said, in this like, kind of natural beingness that all this doing of all these different, very specific tasks that need to be done in a very specific way just felt like it was taking me away from this, and but for them, it seems that like that is their path to this, and that like all paths lead to the same
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
kind of very different modalities, and like the Buddhist, this is a very broad stroke, but like Buddhist tradition, like it's such a science that so much of the nuance and the meticulousness is from like thousands of years of like cultivation, of practice, of all these things that do work for certain people. But it's like at this point, it feels like just having the understanding that like it may not work for you in particular, it may not
Yes.
work for me in particular. And it doesn't mean that I'm broken or that like you're broken, but it's like that actually there's different ways for different people. And like to
Totally.
try to
Yeah.
like glom onto one way to make something happen, actually to me does feel like it did feel like getting further away from my path. And actually going more, there are times, and there's nuance to this too, because it's always like a both and.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
because there are also times that I was glad I did join this Dzogchen Buddhist tradition in those later stages, because there's parts of those later stages where you do feel like, okay, I got this, like like I've arrived. And you're not maybe saying it in that way, but you kind of energetically are like feeling that. You're like, oh, okay, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think I've done it. Like this feels really good. And having a teacher or a guide at that point say no and check your I was gonna say check your ass is like just to kind of cut down that sense of self-importance,
Yes.
or like putting a flag into the what's left of the self, and creating another identity is invaluable, so,
Invaluable. Yes.
so at the same time, so it's like I think that what I benefited the most from um, maps or traditions was just a general sense of like, oh, this is kind of people go through this, and you're not the only one. And that's like Bernadette Roberts like gives that like for every stage, she speaks to like, you're not the only one. She's been through all this,
Yeah.
including the no self. And there's kind of a check in like, okay, if you haven't experienced no self and you listen to Bernadette Roberts or you read her, and you can feel the distance between that realization and what
Mm-hmm.
you were at, you can
Yeah.
kind of, it's like a reference point
Yes.
of like a humility point of like a
Yeah.
humbling. Okay, maybe I don't really know quite as much as I thought I knew at the same time. But yeah.
I'm just laughing to myself because I just remember it was like literally one of my most humiliating moments where I didn't even think that I thought I arrived, but it came through in an exchange with a teacher. And this was literally such a humiliating moment. When I found out it was a moment when I found out that I thought I arrived, and she
Yeah.
proved me that that wasn't fucking the case. And
Yeah.
and it's kind of funny because when the isnness sort of revealed itself, I actually didn't feel like saying this to anyone, not even to my partner. It's almost like there was almost nothing to say. Um, so there was like especially if it's like talking in terms of like some kind of arrival point or something, and yet there was something that definitely the momentum, I would say there was a momentum to this journey that kind of dissipated at that point. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. um um Yeah, absolutely. Um, the value of having someone bring you down, humiliate you. But like, even that teacher, she was, and I know I already said that, but like, I will forever, to me, she was like epitome of what makes a brilliant teacher, where I felt humiliated, but she didn't try to humiliate me. And that's the difference. You know what I mean? Like she was
Mhm.
actually so, it's almost like she recognized when this happens, like in herself. So she didn't judge me for it. She didn't try to shame me or guilt me through this. Um, and yet she let me know, like, girl, I think you've got a long way to go. But and honestly, because it was like in public, it was literally on public forum, like on Zoom with other people. Like, I mean, it was so embarrassing, and I kind of saw that. I was even
Yeah.
shocked that it came through. I was shocked myself because I was asking a question, and here I was hearing my complete, like, so full of myself. Oh my God, it was cringy. But honestly, it goes on a list of the moments that I'm most grateful for. Honestly, for her, for the way she actually taught me what a great teacher is like in many ways as well in that moment. But it was like one of the best moments. Like now it's like it was one of the most pivotal moments in my journey, that humiliating moment. Um, but the other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know, I would love to hear from you about that, which is because I think there's a wisdom to the doubt. You know what I mean? And actually, precisely for that reason, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I was kind of arrogant. I kind of thought I arrived, and yet I was still questioning things. You know what I mean? I was like, there's still a kind of, um, should I talk about it? Shouldn't I talk about it? Kind of feeling like I've already arrived, so now I'm entitled to talk about it. But then once I started to talk about it, didn't actually feel very good or authentic even. And that's why looking back, I actually see the wisdom of that doubt. And I think that for as long as that doubt is there, it actually tells us to keep going, to be honest. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What's your
I
thoughts
think
on
that
that?
um that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I love that because it really is. That's exactly the doubt is what tells you to keep going. And
Yeah.
it also is a bit of a self-protective mechanism from going too far in the arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do feel like the other side of the coin of the audaciousness you kind of need in order to lean into this, to this very strange thing we call a spiritual journey, um, is arrogance.
Yeah.
It's like arrogant, it's like very fine line between arrogance and audaciousness,
Yeah.
right?
Spiritual ego is a bitch.
Oh shit. Yeah. I mean,
The awakened ego, the awakened person or
yeah,
whatever persona is a bitch. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and we all go through it. I think it's like it's all 'cause it's literally by how the mechanism of the self works, how this works. Like every stage where you still have that what the base of what you know you want to build an identity off of, like if you still have that structure and that mechanism at play, you're going to continue to want to build the self that maybe now it's an awakened self, now it's a successful self, it's someone who like is completely healed self, whatever it
Yes,
is,
yes, yes. Yeah.
because there's something that in doing that, it's totally understandable because
Hmm.
you have this like wound underneath. You have like these parts of you that have not been seen, have not been expressed, haven't been held. And on top of that, you're building identities in order to protect.
Mm-hmm.
this this self.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you're going through that now, or if you've been through that, like so important to hold compassion when you discover it, right? Like you may have like the moment of humiliation, and that's important too, and the doubt, but it's also like, of course this happens. Of course, like we can have compassion for the fact that this is inevitable, that as soon as this sense of self grabs on to anything that may give it a sense of purpose, of like goodness, of being okay, that to grab onto that identity and make a new shiny thing out of it and tell everybody, because it's just literally how it works. It's literally like
It's a
how
mechanism.
it's
It
a
literally,
mechanism.
yeah. So it's like we
Yeah.
don't have to. I'm glad that you said that because it's precisely it's like that, and that teacher to me quite literally uh epitomized, precisely what you're saying, where she recognized what was going on, and she was very direct and sort of tough in the way she conveyed this, but she was also compassionate. Like I really felt compassion coming through, even that directness, you know and just recognizing that what you're saying, like it's not like we're doing this on purpose. We might not even know most of the time that we're even doing this, that we are spiritual assholes, that we're now a new identity is being constructed, and whatever, and we try to kind of display it, and whatever, we like, seriously. And it's kind of, and I think it's kind of nice to you use that word quite a bit, to use Sarah's words, normalize it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
To normalize that this too is part of this process. You know what I mean? And it's there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like literally, I don't think of all the people that I spoke to, I don't think I've met one person who would not go through their I've arrived phase, and whatever, and however
Yeah.
that looks. There are more or less annoying ways that shows up for everybody, but I'm talking annoying for the people around primarily. But yeah.
Yeah, and like you spoke to like this ability, like we know there's part of us that knows that like I'm not quite there. Like I'm not, but I kind of wish I was. And that's like the distance between like
Mm.
what is and what we want things to be. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, like I want to share, or I want to like you know, teach or whatever people want to do. And like, but
Yeah.
there's distance between like where I feel most integrity doing that and where I
Mm-hmm.
don't have any doubt, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
have like another word that came up for me is restlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Like if
Mm-hmm.
there's a restlessness, yeah, that to me is like a really key word of what the shift, from coming out of that restlessness into this rest. We were just talking before we started
Yeah.
about like this deep sense of rest of like
Yeah.
literally for me, it's like the body, the mind.
Embodied. Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so deep in the body, um, that there isn't there isn't that doubt.
Mm.
There isn't a
Mm.
place for doubt to stick or
Mm.
like and then start to make noise and like have this sort of yeah, like dynamic within that's like
Mm.
kicking about. But like, so those are all like really deep intelligences like within us that are just giving cue like yeah, that little bit. And what you're saying, I love what you're saying about yeah, same. I didn't know I was being arrogant. I didn't know. And they're saying it's like more energetic maybe than it is like I didn't say to people like I'm awakened. I didn't say explicitly, but there was something about
Yeah.
I was like moving through spaces
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
the way I was like relating to people in my life that I was like, oh, well, I'm awakened. So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just and then kind of I didn't know I was doing this, but like seeing people through those kinds of like rose-colored glasses of like, oh, must be hard to not be awake and kind of thing. But it's like
Oh
but
God.
it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, like but that is so natural. That's such a natural part of
Yeah.
the process. So like not to shame it, but it's
Yeah.
part of like almost the maturing process
Mm,
of like realizing and seeing those parts of ourselves as more and more like comes to light, and more drops away. But like, and that's what Bernadette Roberts talks about too, is like literally for her model, it's she has this, it's like a circle with a very tiny hole in the middle.
mm-hmm.
And that's like her symbol of the self.
Mm-hmm.
And as parts of the self are, you could say, dropped away or cleared or moved, she has this like thing where she takes out like layers of the circle from this like larger circle until there's just a ring left of the circle. And that's when you're like at the precipice of no self. It's like there's very little self left. There's just this outer ring of the self. And then for her, the way she demonstrates it is like that ring goes, and then there's no self left. But then she has a little caveat that's, and yet God leaves a little bit of this sense of self humanity in you just to keep you humble.
And
And
functioning. And
yeah,
functioning.
and
Yeah.
functioning, and like, and I think that's also part of this too, is just like recognizing when um you recognize there's always something more
Mm,
human, there's always something more subconscious, there's always something more we don't know. And that's
yeah.
like not just something, there's infinite,
Infinite. Yeah.
literally infinite unknown in us,
Mm, mm,
that it's no longer like staking a flag in a ground, but
yeah.
not having a ground, and then being more humbled by all the ways we don't know. But yeah, yeah.
I'm going to another passage now, which kind of speaks to everything we talked about and sticks with my favorite theme, which is ordinariness and simplicity. And that's one of the, especially of enlightenment, because, or liberation, or whatever you want to call it. Um, so let me just find it. Um, this is these are bits and pieces. This is not a journey for those who expect love and bliss. Rather, it is for the hardy who have been tried in fire and have come to rest in a tough, immovable trust in that, quote unquote, which lies beyond the known, beyond the self, beyond union, and even beyond love and trust itself. How many can honestly appreciate the triumph of being common and ordinary? Who can understand what it means to learn that the ultimate reality is not a passing moment of bliss, not a fleeting vision or transfiguration, not some ineffable, extraordinary experience or phenomenon, but instead is as close as our eyes. Sorry. As simple as a smile, and as clear as the identity of that which remains when there is no self. The expectation of the grand finale, being one of love and bliss, is a failure to realize that such responses are the responses of self to its own experiences, while while what is does not respond to itself in any similar fashion. It may only be deceiving to think that the ultimate reality is love and bliss, since such experiences may have nothing to do with God at all. As said before, I'm convinced we continually see this reality all our lives, but do not recognize it because it is so usual, common, and ordinary that we go off in search of more tantalizing experiences, experiences more gratifying to the self, Thus, when we can look in the mirror and not experience the great disappointment, but can say instead, everything is as usual and nothing has changed, then perhaps we shall know the intense triumph of being common. I got through it without like bursting into tears completely. Yeah. Well, this is to me basically what summarizes Bernadette Roberts.
Yeah,
um
brilliant. So brilliant.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I maybe will some I think I'll try to actually copy and paste this bit, and I'll include it in the description of this video for everyone to like literally like if that's the only thing if I were to leave, like I'm leaving this realm and I to leave the last words to the humanity, I would not leave any of my words. I would leave this passage.
Yeah.
Seriously, I would just leave this passage because to me, I almost feel like not saying anything at all anymore because it just spoils it. But um, that's why I love Bernadette Roberts, and that's why I will forever admire all the people and teachers who really show the ordinariness of enlightenment or whatever you call it is extraordinary, is that bit that's extraordinary about it. And yeah, Sarah, do you want to add
Yeah.
to this?
So likewise, I'm kind of just basking in that passage because
Right.
it covers so much um in its simplicity again, but what really stuck with me is that last word, like the last sentence of being in this sense of commonality,
Mm,
which is really not, I don't know if it's the opposite, but it's a very different way of, you could say, experiencing than bliss or love in these exalted states. It's the thing that like throws you straight to the ground of this commonality of this common, you could say, being, whatever you want to call it. But there's this commonness that's um so ordinary. And that, if you can feel into her words,
mm-hmm,
it's such, like we talked about, such a transmission of that simplicity, the commonality. If there's anything that makes you feel like you're more than, less than, whatever, it's like it's not it, because it's not that commonness. And I love that too, just the power of what that commonality really brings,
mm,
of like where it is really unconditional love in a sense, right? Like it's that you really just, it's like everything is okay as it is, and it's on this common ground or
mm,
lack of, but it's like this, it is so grounding, um, and at the same time, there's nothing to ground, but it's like
yeah.
almost that just like the experience or feeling or the best way to describe these things is what she was saying. It's just the simplicity of it, the lack of anything special, the lack of any,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
love how Adia talks about it. I actually, I couldn't find this quote, but he's one of the things he said that like something, and I paraphrase, but something along the lines, if you think that you're enlightened, and that makes you special or above anyone else, then enlightenment has not taken place. Something along those lines, because to me, this is like literally that um it just again strips away this whole notion that I started our conversation from, is that I think so many of us have about being enlightened or enlightenment as this being this exalted state that is like just wow all the time and like, whatever. Um, in that phenomenal sense of primarily, but and he also speaks to one of my favorite quotes. I think it was I forgot his name now. Gosh, nothing honestly sticks with this head these days. He said like I don't know actually. I'm not actually sure who said it, but like the enlightenment is ego's biggest disappointment. It's like it's literally it's like it's such a cool it's like the coolest way to kind of like speak to that because it just brings you down like but in the best possible way. And maybe we can talk about it some other time because actually the being nobody and being I had no idea. Only in retrospect I can say that actually this whole being nobody was the most frightening thing that I actually faced during this journey of awakening. The scariest thing, and also being nobody special, which I couldn't believe because I thought like I never thought that I needed to be special in the first place, and yet that sense of specialness was massive. Like almost like to not be special means to be nobody, basically, and to be nobody was frightening as fuck, And I'm like not exaggerating one bit. It really felt like death. So that's why it's I think it's also a massive point of something that creates a lot of fear for people in the journey. Is like that fear of being nobody is what I'm trying to say. But little did I know that being nobody was going to mean like the most incredible freedom, not to need to be somebody and not to need to feel special in any way and so on. So um I don't have any more passages. I don't know who I would recommend. Bernard. I think that if you come across Bernadette Roberts' book, then you came across it. So read it. You know what I mean? But for sure, like I can't say that it would be a book that I would push on anyone at all because trigger warning. It can be now from where I'm sitting. If I read it, it's like, okay, that was intense, what she's been through. But I do remember that it was actually quite frightening the first time I read the book. And to read what she's been through, it was, like I said, really unsettling to read. So now that you know that, if you still decide to read it, go for it. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think people trust your own inner sense that, yeah, I always just feel
Hmm.
like go into what feels true to you. And if you're feeling called to read her books, great.
Yeah.
Also, she does have like a handful of videos on YouTube. There's the one I was speaking to of like demonstrating the different stages up till no self, where she has that like circle thing that I was talking about. That's a really interesting one that doesn't go into her personal like scary bits.
Scary
So
bits, yeah.
yeah. So if you're
Yeah.
just looking to see more of like literally it's a model, like for it's her own model of what the different stages are. And
Hmm.
again, like with any model, it's not going to perfectly map to any of our individual journeys. So like, knowing that, like but you can kind of see in a general sense, like
Hmm.
what stages are in tune into where that feels like it connects.
Hmm.
Um, I think that might be a good way to start or just get a feel for like who she is or like what she's bringing, and you can see how ordinary she is and that she's even I feel like she's a little bit like grumpy. She's just like a little bit like, just got this personality and
Like
that's
she's
like
got personality, people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just very straightforward. I don't know where she's from, but like she just seems like she's kind of almost like a New Yorker, kind of like direct, just like says it as it is. And she's like, I have to do all these presentations all the time. It's like you kind of got this. It's so funny. She's like the opposite of what you would imagine like this awakened being
Yeah.
just supposed to look like. And that's what's so amazing about her own just, yeah, that like what she spoke to in that quote that there's that like hearty self-trust or the hearty trust that like is so
Mm-hmm.
deep within. It's like
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what it is.
Immovable. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, if it's not time for Bernadette Roberts, maybe Bernadette will come to you in 2 years, 3 years, five
Yeah.
years. You know, maybe you'll remember this book and be in a bookstore 10 years from now and then pick it up. You know, it's like
Yeah.
just whenever it's
Maybe
the
you'll
right.
be like me. You'll read it, freak out, and like block it out.
Put it
Forget about
down, like throw it out the
it.
window, like burn it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely. I mean, I would say, and I just want to add that, it's incredible how these things coexist in that, yeah, sure, her experiences have been really intense, but let us not forget, she was actual teacher. She did master's degree. She raised 4 children. She was like this also incredibly regular person. So here she is writing about the experiences of no self, but she's totally participating like in life as this regular person. So I kind of always like to like remind people because I know that the questions I've been asked sometimes was like, well, how do you function if there is no sense of self? And like, that sort of thing. And that I know that it brings a lot of fears for people. Well, how will I function? Well, people do function. People have children, people run businesses, people, do all sorts of things. But the 2 books that I read, because I actually only now realized that she had more books today when I read her bio. The first book is The Experience of No Self, which is my favorite. And if I were to recommend one, I would recommend this one. And then What is Self is my less favorite, but still. So these are the titles, but I'm going to include them in the description. And I think that's pretty much all. And yes, and I'm going to link do the link to her videos on YouTube, right, Sarah? Are there still, do you know if they're
yeah,
still there?
I believe so. Yeah, I haven't seen them in a while, but I think they're probably still out there and we can link them for sure. Yeah.
I must say, however, I just remembered that of all the people that I listen to who are amazing in describing the mechanics and the differences between shifts, to me, she nailed it. Like, to me,
Mhm.
of all the people with that metaphor of hers that she uses with the circles, like she really nailed it, like to describe it in such simple terms. That's so if anyone's interested in like what's the difference, then I think that those videos, specifically that Sarah mentioned, would probably be better choice than the book. Um, from this point of view, just the technicalities, like if you like this sort of thing. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.
You too,
Bye.
Betty.